A very warm welcome to everyone. It is the last day. I don't know what I can possibly say to encapsulate the duration and the largesse of this project. On the other hand, it doesn't really feel like the last day. In fact, seeing the number of people here, I'm pretty sure that it's only the beginning of Italian feminist thinking that will keep us buzzing with energy for quite a while to come. It was a real pleasure to work with a number of people to pull this immense project together. Angelica Bollettinari, Giulia Casalini, Laura Guy, Irene Ravel, Amy Tobin, Helena Rekit, of course, and Dimitra Gitsa, and especially all the participants, speakers, artists who contributed with their suggestions to shape this program. Today's event is made possible by our collective efforts and by our sponsors, which include the Arts Council of England, the Goldsmiths Annual Fund, and especially the Showroom and Louise for being extremely generous and accommodating. Thank you. I think the snowball effect that created Now You Can Go began with Fulvia Carnevale's passionate presentation at Goldsmiths during the Feminist Durations Conference, and especially with the reading group sessions that followed. For me personally, it was during these sessions that our collective efforts were brought together to negotiate and challenge our respective knowledges and standpoints in relation to the Rivolta Femminile group and the radical figure of Carla Lonzi. What started with thinking about how to activate our reading by perhaps creating a single event or a weekend conference led to this intensive project and a year-long reading group, which will now also carry on. This is perhaps a cliche way of saying that collectivity has always been part of the revolutionary power of a feminist methodology, praxis, and politics. Simultaneously, and in line with feminist politics that challenge notions of equality, it provided us a way to negotiate our individual positions of power and test the landscape of our imagination through our respective differences. The case studies of today's speakers will remind us of the very tensions between feminist art and feminist politics. In the ongoing doctoral research of our first presenter, Katia Almerini, we have an in-depth study of the Beato Angelico cooperative in Rome. And amongst the women who founded this space were the artist Carla Accardi, of which we've heard a lot, and also Susan Santoro, which attended the Women's Library at Goldsmiths, and we had a talk with her recently. Feminists who stayed committed to both feminism and art whilst falling in and out with Carla Lonzi. Our next presenter, Giulia Damiani, her research on the collective Le Nemesiache, who claimed in their manifesto that creativity is political, it is life, routine, erotic, in harmony with nature and the cosmos. To follow, Giulia Casalini explores a number of contemporary collectives who open up women's issues to broader socio-political debates by even putting the notion of woman under scrutiny through intersectional and queer approaches. Lastly, to further complicate and challenge both identity and the notion of collectivity, Olivia Guaraldo argues that identity is precisely this process of relating and existing with others that can reshape our thinking of freedom and happiness. I look forward to Angie Voila responding to Olivia, seeing that they are both in a sense working together and collectively to edit a special issue of the journal Gender and Education on feminist activism in Europe today. And as if feminism and women didn't have enough challenges, we seem to be keeping ourselves busy by challenging the work we have actually done so far. And feminisms can be accused of many things, but I don't think laziness is one of them. That would also explain the proliferation of feminist philosophies, activisms, and art across all disciplines, ranging from law, technology, science, any field you can think of, there is a feminist intersection. It is through such constant self-reflection and collective struggle that feminist philosophies, activism, and art have endured the test of time and continue to be amongst the most influential and powerful movements for over half a century. As the age-old saying goes, history repeats itself. Today we continue the ongoing work of feminisms by challenging this saying, this idea of history with herstories, gender stories, to make more room for stories, less repetition, and who knows, maybe some revolutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. In my presentation, I'm going to speak about the Cooperativa Beato Angelico, which was an autonomous artistic space running in Rome in the middle of the 70s, only by women, 11 women. It was founded in 1976 and lasting just 2 years. The artists involved, well, the women were not only artists, came from different background, provenance, generations. This is the list of the women: Carla Cardi, Nilde Carabba, Franca Chiabra, Anna Maria Colucci, Regina della Noce, Nedda Guidi, Eva Menzio, Teresa Montemaggiori, Stefania Hausler, Susan Santoro, and Silvia Truppi. Even if they never produced a manifesto or a declaration of feminist intentions, this is a direct result of the feminist, the Italian feminist movement. In fact, they came from a very important experience in collectives and feminist groups in Italy. And for a better understanding, I just prepared this slide, which is quite helpful because for understanding which was the background behind the cooperative. So the main groups was the Rivolta Femminile. Accardi, Santoro, and Colucci came from Rivolta, so the free artists based in Rome. A very important support came from Nilde Carabba, which is still based in Milan. She was, at the time, lives in Milan as well, and she was involved in the women's bookstore, so she brought a really important experience. Also, she was involved in Rivolta 2 and Via Cherubini Group, which is a group of self-consciousness raising focused on creativity and image. And also Truppi was coming from the North Italy as well, and she was involved in this group. A different situation was the one of Stefania Hausler. She's like Susan Santoro, North American. She brought the cooperative a very different kind of activism. So the one more focused on civil rights, and also she was involved in the Black Panther Party. Nilde Carabba, speaking about the origins of the cooperative, Nilde Carabba affirms that the idea to open the cooperative came out in a natural way, spontaneously, during the meeting of Autocoscienza, where there were a large number of artists involved. Carabba also remembered that they met up in Carla Cardi's home in Rome because they were friends and often spent their weekends all together. Despite that, for a better understanding of the genealogy of the Coop, we need to go back some years and focus on the relationship between Carla Cardi, the most affirmed artist of the Coop, and Carla Lonzi. Since the 60s, they were close friends. Accardi was one of the very few well-established artists in Italy, female artists, since her participation in the artistic movement Forma Uno. And Lonzi was one of the few brilliant female art critics, as we know, in Italy. Also, I think it's interesting that they were both married with an established male artist. Since the 60s, Accardi was developing a feminist critique against society, starting with the art system, which was their world. They started with an awareness concerning roles, women discrimination, and generating interrogation upon creativity and language. In Lonzi's book Autoritratto, over the feminist setup and subversion in terms of art critique, as we have spoken yesterday, we can also see for the first time in Italy, inside an art book, a very prompt feminist declaration coming from a woman artist. Accardi, in fact, the only woman interviewed in the book, expresses an early feminist consideration about white colonization and male colonization, and she specifically expresses her negative feeling as a woman inserted in a culture that is not representative for her. Accardi suggests the idea that was developing with Lonzi in those years about the need of withdrawal from the patriarchy, a sort of tabula rasa from the existing language and representation. Being an artist, Accardi translates this idea artistically, unconsciously, working outside of the frame, and especially when she started to use a specific material called the Psychofoil, that is this transparent material that we can see here. This is ethyl acetate, a transparent material that she firstly placed in the frame and then in the space. And after many years, Accardi affirms that when she used this transparency with the Psychofoil, it was probably the moment where she was very close artistically with the feminism, suggesting the idea of a tabula rasa. During the year of Rivolta, the priority was an intellectual and political activity, both for Lonzi and Accardi as well. And for the passionate implication, Accardi also faced consequences. In 1971, in fact, she was suspended from her job in Rome, in the secondary school Giovanni Papini in Rome, where she used to work as a teacher. And there is a war was for speaking about feminism with the girls of 3 female classes. And so I'm telling you this story because the origins of the COPA are very connected with the relationship between Carla Accardi and Carla Lonzi, and especially with the estrangement that occurred around the year 1975, maybe early. The COPA, in fact, was founded after this separation and represents a new stage for the artist. What we know today is that even if Accardi and Lonzi have the same idea about patriarchal society, so constructing from generation to generation through the denigration of women, they fell out over the different conception of art. Being feminist and critic of the patriarchal system, for Lonzi was a road without return. The artist and the art critic were complicit of this patriarchal art system as well, and in fact she left it. She experimented her creativity within the self-consciousness practice. Furthermore, she no longer believed in the role of the art critic, and so coherently did not want to speak about art, including female artists and feminist artists. Accardi, on the other hand, didn't want to renounce being an artist. She always was an artist and wanted to continue expressing her creative agent. In addition, in 1974, the relationship between some artists of Rivolta Femminile and Carla Lonzi were complicated due to the publication of Towards a New Expression, the book printed with Rivolta Femminile made by Susan Santoro, and soon after the generation of criticism from many angles. This artist book included some, as we can see, some enlarged photos of the female genitalia, juxtaposed with flower, conch shells, and text, which reflected upon the representation of female sexuality and how they had been effaced by history, smoothed down, and idealized. Susan Santoro remembered that Lonzi and other women in Rivolta disapproved the artistic project. So the Cooperativa Beato Angelico was founded in the middle of this complicated situation when feminist artists were sometimes misunderstood by other feminists, and where they also did not receive any support in terms of help in curating and art criticism. Subsequently, Accardis, Antonio and Colucci left Rivolta Femminile and decided to create this autonomous space together with other 8 women, previously mentioned, in response to move away also from the abstract reflection and towards a more concrete empowerment within the art world, and eventually to affirm once again themselves as artists, experimenting this new age organization of an artistic autonomous space. I can see that the cooperative is an attempt also to overcome the self-consciousness raising phase, and I believe that this moment marks the coming out from the reflecting intangible stage, which at the same time could be read as a stasis from the artistic production, from the to make in a traditional way, artistically speaking. Also, we must not forget that there were concrete reasons behind the idea of the coop. For example, the need to be visible in a difficult art system that in Rome was dominated predominantly by men. So the foundation of the space was connected with the issues involving female access in the art. Almost all the founding artists exhibited in their most current works in the space. There was, however, also an important interest in women artists from the past, as there was a recognition of the significance of female artistic tradition. So for this reason, they curated a free exhibition of women artists of the past. This is the brochure of the first one, that was the opening of the cooperative, dedicated to Artemisia Gentileschi. It was curated by Eva Menzio, which was not an artist, but she was very important in terms of public relation and also economic support. Also, the exhibition was accompanied by a journal telling the story of the rape trial of Artemisia. And then the second one was about Elisabetta Sirani, and the last was dedicated to Regina, a futurist artist that was just dying in 1974. So speaking about the artworks of the artists that exhibited in the space, analyzing the artistic work, we can see an elaboration of concept very much influenced by Italian feminism. I consider that the particularity of the artworks shown in the Coop were the research in creating a possible and different art, forms and imagery. They were interested in creating something new, and the result is not easily categorized under the label of feminist art. In fact, the artists didn't work thinking to create like a proper feminist art intended as a style, a social political art, or a kind of didascalic art. Their solutions were connected much more aesthetically with the processual art. Without a deep knowledge, I think, of their previous experience and process, I believe we couldn't really understand this work. This is probably one of the reasons why only until recent years in Italy we thought there were not such examples of feminist art, as we used to compare it to a well-known Anglo-Saxon example, which feminism was much more recognizable, for example, for the works produced in the West Coast in USA. Even if the artists of the Coop worked with different media, style, and research, we need to look at the past. The need to look at the past reflects the same mechanism of the analysis of the depth and that we can see in the self-consciousness practice, which was what they had in common. And this process, connected with the feminist context, generated the themes of memory, absence, genealogy, and identity. Concerning the ideas of affirm a new woman identity, no longer categorized under the opposite of man as a passive subject or absent, Susan Santoro worked in an original research concerning the representation of the female genitalia in the ancient culture. Since then, the artist began to live in Rome at the beginning of 70s. She was studying the Greek-Roman sculpture, noting that the female genitalia was always absent, smooth, or sublimated into other forms, and whereby male genitalia was always represented. Connected with this project of absence, Santoro produced photos and cast of female genitalia, images and detail, together with the need to visualize what was censored in our tradition, and also the need to affirm her sexual difference. Other artists explore the Western past in connection with an influence of anthropology, at the time popular and influential in Italian art. Themes as the tent, the cave were present, for example, both in Hausler installation and in Anna Maria Colucci performance, Caos Caso Cosa, which was when she was reading The High King, representing an attempt to return to a time before male colonization outside everyday contemporary life. According some years before, had created the tents in her desire to come back to women's original roots, maybe before settled life, when possibly women may have been freer. Together with the Caos Caso Cosa, another performance took place in the Coop, and was a Time Rights, a performance made by Stephanie Hausler. That was a ritualization of trauma, torture, and violence. As I said, from a conscious or unconscious process, the practice of autocoscienza, self-consciousness raising, was an important part of the creative process for the artist, and in the artistic production of the time, probably is the key for a better understanding. In Silvia Truppi, the reference at the autocoscienza is explicit. Truppi exposed the series of photo La Danza, the dance, as a result of the feminist group experience, showing the new sense of liberation and sisterhood, focusing the attention to the photographic medium. Truppi indeed participated in the Milan group of consciousness, focusing the visual art. That was an explicit transposition of self-consciousness in a creative project that is also at the time were published in this book. Other artists, such as Nilde Carabba, never exhibited in the space, but she shown her series of serigraphs that we can see in this photo that is from the Susan Santoro archive. The series is called Per cielo e per mare, and is a representation of the elements of the sea and the sky, in a moment in which the artist proceed from geometric abstract form towards a new sinuous line. The water, the sea, and the waves suggest the idea of a body and a sexual liberation. And in fact, no surprise that Irigaray, for the Italian edition of Speculum, selected one of these Nilde Carabba's waves for the cover of the book. A very interesting case in the Coop was the one of Carla Cardi. She created for the Cooperativa Beato Angelico the special site-specific environment origin origine, a work very different from the rest of her production, artistic production. This is the most, we could say, the most emotional and intimate of her works, perhaps because she felt free from prejudices from the art system. Origin is in fact a tribute to her matrilineage, and she used is a sycophile, the same material that she used in that time, and she put original images, photography of the mother and the grandmother in black and white. So it's a declared tribute to her matrilineage, and also double reflection about maternity, because she was already a mother of a daughter. And reading Autoritratto, we can perceive some inspiration already in the book when she affirmed a very important comments about the need to express artistically a sort of female redemption. Anna Maria Colucci, reader, had the opportunity to exhibit her previous work from the 60s, already fallen into the oblivion, that includes paintings, sculpture, and visual poetry. After decades, she admitted how, after a while, it was difficult to continue being an artist for the closer against the young women in the Roman art world. The machismo of the curators, and later due for looking after her family, she had a son. So this fact complicated the already difficult situation. In the COP, she exposed the works that shown an early feminist reflection inscribed in the postmodern context. She denounced the image of the new woman in the advert that was rising from the new Italian capitalist society of the 60s. With this work, she operates a selection of that they are quite. They have some connections with the works of Mimmo Rotella, but it's interesting that she operates a different work, because she selects images with the meanings, a special meaning, and underlining a political critique already. So she acts a specific selection of the images compliance with the patriarchal roles and stereotypes, moving up many feminist artworks of the successive decades. Colucci's critique is even more explicit in the first drawings, where she interrogates the language, its limit, and the need to deconstruct the tongue, the alphabet. So, concluding, even if the cooperative emerged after the estrangement with Lonzi, and when she didn't want to be related with the art world, I think there wasn't an intention from the art of going against that kind of feminism. Although Lonzi was absent and there was an apparent incompatibility with her position about art, I believe the COB could represent a kind of first transformation in thinking art, relations, spaces, and creativity, dismantling the fixed roles between artist and critic, where artists began at the same time critics themselves and provide the work of the other women, installing exhibition and managing space autonomously. We can also consider the cooperative as an heterotopia, a space where the norms and the hierarchy typical of the art space were subverted, as well as the custom, the language, and the system of power. It was therefore a non-hierarchical space based on a new kind of relationship, an art space different from the rest in the city. In fact, it challenged the system of authority of the critics and the curators with a withdrawal, with the aim to realize a transformation inside art and culture. Thank you.